Thank you all for tuning into Big Mama Story Time. Story Time! Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment to my page. Here we go. Hi guys, thank you all for tuning into Big Mama Story Time on today. Today I will be reading to you all Charlie and the Chocolate Factory by Roald Dahl. He's about the only person that made this book. So let's get into it, guys. This is Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, not Willy Wonka. All right, let's get into it. This is Charlie. How'd you do? And how'd you do? And how'd you do again? He is pleased to meet you. The whole of his family, the 6 grown-ups and little Charlie Bucket, lived together in a small wooden house on the edge of a great town. There wasn't any question of them being able to buy a better house. They were far too poor for that. Every one of them, the 2 old grandfathers, the 2 old grandmothers, Charlie's father, Charlie's mother, and especially little Charlie himself, went about from morning till night with a horrible empty feeling in their tummies. Charlie felt it worst of all. He desperately wanted something more filling and satisfying than cabbage and cabbage soup. The one thing he longed for more than anything else was chocolate. Okay. All right. Candy. But I haven't yet told you about the one awful thing that tortured little Charlie more than anything else. In the town itself, actually within sight of the house in which Charlie lived, there was an enormous chocolate factory. And it wasn't simply an ordinary enormous chocolate factory either. It was the largest and most famous in the whole world. It was Wonka's factory, owned by a man called Willy Wonka, Mr. Willy Wonka, the greatest inventor and maker of chocolates that there has ever been. And what a tremendous, marvelous place it was. Twice a day on his way to and from school, little Charlie Bucket had to walk right past the gates of the factory. And every time he went by, he would begin to walk very, very slowly. And he would hold his nose high in the air and take long, deep sniffs of the gorgeous, chocolatey smell all around him. Oh, how he loved that smell. And how he wished he could go inside the factory and see what it was like. Look at him standing over there by the factory, seeing the Wonka trucks come out, just enticing himself. In the evenings, Charlie always went into the room of his 4 grandparents to listen to their stories. Oh, what a man he is, this Mr. Willy Wonka, cried Grandpa Joe. Did you know, for example, that he has himself invented more than 200 kinds of chocolate bars, each with a different citra, each far sweeter and creamier and more delicious than anything the other chocolate factories can make? Perfectly true, cried Grandma Josephine. And he sends them all to all the 4 corners of the earth. Just then, Mr. Bucket, Charlie's father, came into the room. Have you heard the news? He cried. This is the newspaper, y'all, the news article. It says, Wonka factory to be opened at last to lucky few. I, Willy Wonka, have decided to allow 5 children, just 5, mind you, and no more, to visit my factory this year. These lucky 5 will be shown around personally by me, and then, at the end of the tour, as a special present, all of them will be given enough chocolates and sweets to last them for the rest of their lives. So watch out for the golden tickets hidden underneath the wrapping paper of 5 ordinary bars of chocolate. Good luck to you all and happy hunting. Signed, Willy Wonka. All right, Mr. Willy Wonka. He ain't even show his face. The very next day, the first golden ticket was found. The finder was a boy named Augustus Gloop, and Mr. Bucket's evening newspaper carried a large picture of him on the front page. The picture showed a 9-year-old who was so enormously fat. He looked as though he had been blown up with a powerful pump. Great flabby folds of fat bulged out from every part of his body. Dang, that's so descriptive, y'all. Oh, Lord, okay. And his face was like a monstrous ball of dough with two small, greedy, currenty eyes peering out upon the world. I just knew Augustus would find a golden ticket, his mother had told the newspaper man. He eats so many bars of chocolate a day that it was almost impossible for him not to find one. Eating to his hobby, you know. Eating is his hobby, you know. What a revolting woman, said Grandma Josephine. And what a repulsive boy, said Grandma Georgina. Only 4 golden tickets left, said Grandpa George. I wonder who'll get those. On the day before Charlie Bucket's birthday, the newspapers announced that the second golden ticket had been found. The lucky person was a small girl named Veruca Salt, who lived with her rich parents. Mr. Salt eagerly explained, "You see, boys, I went out into the town and started buying up all the Wonka bars I could lay my hands on. Thousands of them. I must have bought, but 3 days went by and we had no luck. My little Veruca would lie for hours on the floor, kicking and yelling in the most disturbing way. Now she's all smiles and we have a happy home once again." "That's even worse than the fat boy," said Grandma Josephine. Grandpa Joe said, "No good can ever come from spoiling a child like that. You mark my words." "You ain't telling no story about that, Grandpa Joe. Spoiling children, whew, that comes to a price. Nothing wrong with it, but doing it a lot, all the time, even when they bad, does come to a price." But hey, do your children how you want. All right. Only once a year on his birthday did Charlie Bucket ever get to taste a bit of chocolate. The whole family saved up their money for that special occasion. And when the great day arrived, Charlie was always presented with one chocolate bar to eat all by himself. "Happy birthday!" cried the 4 old grandparents as Charlie came into their room early the next morning. Charlie smiled nervously. He was holding his present, his only present. Wonka's Whipple's Scrumptious Fudge Mellow Delight, it said on the wrapper. "Just forget about all those golden tickets and enjoy the chocolate," Grandpa Joe said. Then suddenly, as though he couldn't bear the suspense any longer, Charlie tore the wrapper right down the middle. There was no sign of a golden ticket anywhere. Charlie looked up. 4 kind old faces were watching him intently. He smiled at them, a small, sad smile. And then he shrugged his shoulders, picked up the chocolate bar, and said, "Here, Mother, have a bit. We'll share it." And the others all cried, No, it's all yours." Oh, don't be sad. Good things come to those who wait. That evening, Mr. Bucket's newspaper announced, 2 golden tickets found today. Only 1 more left. "All right," said Grandpa Joe. "Let's hear who found them." The 3rd ticket read, "Mr. Bucket was found by a Miss Violet Beauregards. I'm a gum chewer normally," she shouted, "but when I heard about these ticket things of Mr. Wonka's, I gave up gum and started on chocolate bars. Now, of course, I'm back on gum. I could do without it." "Beastly girl," said Grandma Josephine. "Despicable," said Grandma Georgina. And who got the fourth golden ticket? Charlie asked. Now let me see, said Mr. Bucket. The fourth golden ticket was found by a boy named Mike Teaver, but the lucky winner seemed extremely annoyed by the whole business. Can't you fools see I'm watching television? He said angrily. Do all children behave like this nowadays? Said Grandma Georgina. Yeah, some of them do. Now there's only one ticket left, said Grandpa George. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. After the snow, there came a freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping. And oh, how bitter cold it was. The excitement over the golden tickets had long since been forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought now to anything except the two vital problems of trying to keep warm and trying to get enough to eat. Then one afternoon, walking back home with the icy wind in his face, Charlie's eye was caught suddenly by something silvery lying in the gutter in the snow. It was a filthy pence piece. Several people went hurrying past him. Carefully, Charlie pulled it out from under the snow. It meant one thing to him at that moment. It meant food. Automatically, Charlie turned and began moving towards the nearest shop. The man behind the counter looked fat and well fed. I think, said Charlie quietly, I have one of those chocolate bars. Why not? The shopkeeper said. Charlie picked it up and tore off the wrapper, and suddenly, from underneath the wrapper, there came a brilliant flash of gold. Charlie's heart stood still. It's a golden ticket, screamed the shopkeeper. I'm awfully glad you got it. Good luck to you, Sonny. Thank you, Charlie said, and off he went, running through the snow as fast as his legs could go. And 5 minutes later, he arrived at his own home. I bet you he was happy. I sure would have been. I waited for that ticket all along. Seeing everybody getting, you finally get what you've been waiting on. Mother, yelled Charlie, rushing in like a hurricane. It's the 5th golden ticket, and I found it! Grandpa Joe threw up his arms and yelled, Yippee! And at the same time, in one fantastic leap, this old fellow of 96 and a half jumped onto the floor and started doing the dance of victory in his pajamas. Let me see it, Charlie, Mr. Bucket said. Read it aloud, said Grandpa Joe. Mr. Bucket held the lovely golden ticket up close to his eyes. He cleared his throat and said, all right, I'll read it. All right, guys, this is what the ticket said. Greetings to you, the lucky finder of this golden ticket. From Mr. Willy Wonka. I shake you warmly by the hand. Tremendous things are in store for you. Many wonderful surprises await you. In your wildest dreams, you could not imagine that such things could happen to you. Just wait and see. The date I have chosen for the visit is the first day up in the month of February. You must come to the factory gates at 10 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. Signed, Willy Wonka. Mrs. Bucket said, now, who is going to go with Charlie to the factory? I will, shouted Grandpa Joe. I'll look after him. You leave it to me. Of course he going. He was too happy. He jumped out of bed. He like, uh-oh, I get to go. He was more happy than Charlie. All right. Outside the gates of Wonka's factory, enormous crowds of people had gathered to watch the 5 lucky ticket holders going in. Mr. Wonka was standing all alone just inside the open gates of the factory. Welcome, my little friends. Welcome to the factory, he called out. The big fat boy stepped up. I'm Augustus Gloop, he said. Augustus, cried Mr. Wonka. My dear boy, how good to see you. Delighted, charmed. My name, said the next child to go for it, is Verusha Salt. My dear Verusha, how do you do? What a pleasure this is. You do have an interesting name, don't you? The next two children, Violet Beauregard and Mike Tever, came forward, and last of all, a smart, nervous voice whispered, Charlie Bucket. Charlie, cried Mr. Wonka. Well, 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 you're the one who found your ticket only yesterday, aren't you? Just in time, my dear boy. Charlie glanced back in all sight of the outside world disappeared. Here we are, cried Mr. Wonka. Through this big red door, please. How lovely and warm, whispered Charlie. I know, and what a marvelous smell, answered Grandpa Joe. Now this, my dear children, said Mr. Wonka, this is the main corridor. Follow me. He trotted off rapidly down the corridor with the tails of his plum-colored velvet coat flapping behind him, and the visitors all hurried after him. The place was like a gigantic rabbit warren. Suddenly, Mr. Wonka stopped. In front of him, there was a shiny metal door. On the door, in large letters, it said, The Chocolate Room. Oh, that sounds so good, guys. I'll be ready. This is Augustus Gloop. This is Verusha Salt. This is Mike Tever. This is Violet Beauregard. And this is Charlie Bucket, guys. If y'all don't, see the right names or whatever. All right. An important room, this, cried Mr. Wonka. The heart of the whole business, and so beautiful. But do be careful, my dear children. Don't lose your heads. They were looking down upon a lovely valley. There, cried Mr. Wonka, pointing his cane at a great brown river. It's all chocolate. Every drop of that river is hot, melted chocolate of the finest quality. Ooh, I bet you that tastes good, guys. Suddenly, the air was filled with screams of excitement. The screams came from Verusha Salt. Look, she screamed. It's a little person. It's a little man. The tiny men, they were no larger than medium-sized dolls, were staring back across the river at the visitors. But they can't be real people, Charlie said. Of course they're real people, Mr. Wonka answered. They're Oompa Loompas. Augustus Gloop had sneaked down to the river and was scooping hot metal chocolate into his mouth as fast as he could. Augustus! Called out Mrs. Gloop. Come away from that river at once! Augustus cried Mr. Wonka. You must come away. You are dirtying my chocolate. He ain't care nothing about the boy. He said it's chocolate, guys. Suddenly, there was a shriek. And then a splash, and into the river went Augustus Gloop, and in 1 second he had disappeared under the brown surface. There he goes, somebody shouted, pointing upwards. Mr. Wonka turned around and clicked his fingers sharply. Immediately an Oompa Loompa appeared. Now listen to me, said Mr. Wonka. I want you to take Mr. and Mrs. Gloop up to the fudge room and help them to find their son, Augustus. He just gone up the pipe. Oh, wow. That is crazy. Off we go, cried Mr. Wonka. Hurry up, everybody, and please don't worry about Augustus Gloop. He's bound to come out in the wash. They always do. A steamy mist was rising up now from the great warm chocolate river, and out of the mist there appeared suddenly a most fantastic pink boat. This is my private yacht, cried Mr. Wonka, beaming with pleasure. Isn't she beautiful? As soon as everyone was safely in the Oompa Loompas pushed the boat away from the bank and began to row. The boat sped on down the river. There was some kind of dark tunnel ahead. Row on, shouted Mr. Wonka. Full speed ahead. And with the Oompa Loompas rowing faster than ever, the boat shot into the pitch-dark tunnel. Switch on the lights, shouted Mr. Wonka. The river of chocolate was flowing very fast inside the pipe, and the Oompa Loompas were all roaring like mad. Mr. Wonka clapped his hands and laughed and kept glancing at his passengers to see if they were enjoying it as much as he. But 5 seconds later, when a bright red door came into a sight ahead, he suddenly shouted, "Stop the boat!" On the door it said, "Inventing room, private. Keep out." Mr. Wonka took a key from his pocket, leaned over the side of the boat, and put the key in the keyhole. "This is the most important room in the entire factory," he said. "But you said the other one was." "All my most secret new inventions are cooking and simmering in here. No touching, no meddling, and no tasting." Charlie Bucket stared. The whole place was filled with smoke and steam and delicious rich smells. Mr. Wonka led the party over to a gigantic machine. "Here we go," he cried, and he pressed 3 different buttons on the side of it. Then suddenly the machine let out a monstrous, mighty groan, and a tiny drawer popped out. In it lay something so small and thin and gray that everyone thought it must be a mistake. "You mean that's all?" said Mike Teave, disgusted. There was a pause. Then suddenly Violet Beauregarde let out a yell of excitement. "By gum! It's gum!" she shrieked. "It's a stick of chewing gum." "Right you are," cried Mr. Wonka. "It's a stick of the most amazing and fabulous and sensational gum in the world." Now, why do you just tempt her? You know she like gum. "This gum," Mr. Wonka went on, "is my latest, my greatest, my most fascinating invention. That tiny little strip lying there is a whole 3-course dinner all by itself. Wow." "What do you mean?" It's tomato soup, roast beef, and blueberry pie," said Violet Beauregarde. "Hand over this magic gum of yours and we'll see if the thing works." "I would rather you didn't take it," Mr. Wonka told her gently. "You see, I haven't got it quite right yet." Suddenly, before Mr. Wonka could stop her, she shot out her hand and grabbed the stick of gum and popped it into her mouth. Little Charlie Bucket was staring at her absolutely spellbound. Her face and hands and legs and neck turned a brilliant purplish blue, the color of blueberry juice. "I feel most peculiar," gasped Violet. "Great heavens, girl!" screeched Mrs. Beauregard. "You're blowing up like a balloon." "Like a blueberry," said Mr. Wonka. There was no saving her now. "It always happens like that," sighed Mr. Wonka. "It's most annoying." Mr. Wonka clicked his fingers and 10 Oompa Loompas appeared. "Take her along to the juice room at once. We've got to squeeze the juice out of her immediately." Oh, wow. Now you got to get juice squeezed out of you because you want to be bad and not listen. They crazy. "Well, well, well," sighed Mr. Willy Wonka. "2 naughty little children gone. 3 good little children left. I think we better get out of this room quickly before we lose anyone else." Charlie Bucket saw that they were now back in one of these long pink corridors with many other pink corridors leading out of it. Mr. Wonka was rushing along in front, turning left and right and left, and Grandpa Joe was saying, "Keep a good hold of my hand, Charlie. It would be terrible to get lost in here." They passed the door in the wall. "No time to go in," shouted Mr. Wonka. "Press on, press on." Mr. Wonka rushed on down the corridor. "The nut room," it said on the next door they came to. "All right," said Mr. Wonka. "Stop here for a moment and take a peek, but don't go in. Whatever you do, don't go into the nut room." It was an amazing sight. 100 squirrels were seated upon high stools. There were mounds and mounds of walnuts, and the squirrels were all working away like mad, shelling the walnuts at speed. "Hey, Mummy," shouted Verusha suddenly. "Give me one of those squirrels. I want one." "They're not for sale," Mr. Wonka answered. "She can't have one." "Who says I can't?" shouted Verusha. "I'm going in." "Don't," said Mr. Wonka. But he was too late. The girl had already thrown open the door. He knew they was bad. He knew they weren't going to listen. That's why he did that. "All right," Verusha said. "I'll have you." She reached out her hands to grab a pretty little squirrel, and every single squirrel around the table took a flying leap towards her. One climbed up onto her shoulder and started tapping the wretched girl's head. "They're testing her to see if she's a bad nut," said Mr. Wonka. Then all at once the squirrels pulled Verusha to the ground and started carrying her across the floor. "By golly, she is going down the chute," said Mr. Salt. "Then save her," cried Mrs. Salt. "Too late," said Mr. Wonka. "That particular chute runs directly into the great big main rubbish pile, which carries away all the rubbish from every part of the factory." Both Mr. and Mrs. Salt dashed into the nut room and ran over to the hole in the floor. "Verusha!" shouted Mrs. Salt. "Are you down there?" She needed only one tiny little push, and that is exactly what the squirrels gave her. "Good gracious me!" said Mr. Salt. The squirrels rushed up behind him. "Help!" he shouted, but he was already toppling up forward, and down the chute he went, just as his wife had done before him and his daughter. Wow, them squirrels took both of them down. Like, he told them don't go in there. All of them went in there. "I've never seen anything like it," cried Mr. Wonka. "The children are disappearing like rabbits, but they'll all come out in the wash." He skipped across the passage to a pair of double doors. The doors slid open. "Now then," cried Mr. Wonka, "which button shall we press first?" "Take your pick." Charlie Bucket stared around him in astonishment. "This isn't just an ordinary up and down lift," announced Mr. Wonka proudly. "This lift can go sideways and long ways and slant ways and any other way you can think of." Quickly, Charlie started reading the labels alongside the button. "The Rock Candy Mine, 10,000 feet deep," it said on one. Then "Strawberry Juice, Water Pistols, Stickjaw for talkative parents." "Isn't there a television room in all this lot?" asked Mike Teave. "Certainly," Mr. Wonka said. "That button over there." "Whoopee!" shouted Mike Teave. "That's for me." Instantly, there was a tremendous whizzing noise. The doors clanged shut and the lift leaped it away, but it leaped sideways. The next moment, there was a screaming of brakes, and the lift began to slow down. Then it stopped altogether. Mr. Wonka said, "Just a minute now. Listen to me. I want everybody to be very careful in this room. There is dangerous stuff around in here, and you must not tamper with it." The Teave family, together with Charlie and Grandpa Joe, stepped out of the lift into a room so bright and dazzling white that they screwed up their eyes in pain. There was an enormous camera on wheels and a whole army of Oompa Loompas. "Here we go," cried Mr. Wonka. "This is the testing room for my very latest and greatest invention, television chocolate. I shall now send a bar of chocolate. I shall now send a bar of my very best chocolate from one end of this room to the other by television." One of the Oompa Loompas caught hold of a large switch and pulled it down. "The chocolate's gone," shouted Grandpa Joe. Suddenly, a small bar of chocolate appeared in the middle of the screen. Take it, shouted Mr. Wonka. Charlie put out his hand and touched the screen, and the bar of chocolate came away in his fingers. Eat it, shouted Mr. Wonka. It'll be delicious. It's the same bar. It's got smaller on the journey, that's all. What about people? Asked Mike Teeth. A person, cried Mr. Wonka. Are you off your rocker? But could it be done? Good heavens, child. I really don't know. I suppose it could. Mike Teeth was already off and running. Look at me, he shouted. I'm going to be the first person in the world to be sent by television. No, 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 cried Mr. Wonka. But there was no stopping Mike Teeth. The crazy boy rushed on, and when he reached the enormous camera, he jumped straight for the switch, scattering Oompa Loompas right and left. As he did so, he leaped out into the full glare of the mighty lens. There was a blinding flash. A tiny little voice, no louder than the squeaking of a mouse, came out of the television set. Hi, Pop, look at me. He was not more than an inch tall. He shrunk, said Mr. Teeth. Of course he shrunk, said Mr. Wonka. What did you expect? This is terrible. Well, Mrs. T, what are we going to do? Well, said Mr. Wonka, we'll put him in a special machine for testing the stretchiness of chewing gum. He clicked his fingers and Oompa Loompa appeared immediately. Follow these orders, said Mr. Wonka, handing the Oompa Loompa a piece of paper. You'll find the boy in his father's pocket. Oh, wow. Look what he did to himself. Being disrespectful. Not listening. Guys, you gotta listen. If an adult tell you don't do it, more than likely they're telling you for a reason. Please listen. You may not understand it right then and there, but every action has a reaction. Consequences can be had. But let's get done. Which room shall it be next? Said Mr. Wonka as he darted into the lift. And how many children are there left now? Little Charlie looked at Grandpa Joe, and Grandpa Joe looked back at little Charlie. But Mr. Wonka, Grandpa Joe called after him, there's only Charlie left now. Mr. Wonka swung round and stared at Charlie. There was a silence. You mean you're the only one left? He said, pretending to be surprised. Why, yes, whispered Charlie. Yes. But my dear boy, he cried out, that means you won! Well done, Charlie. Well done. Now the fun is really going to start. But we mustn't dilly. We mustn't dally. Luckily for us, we have the great glass lift to speed things up. Mr. Wonka was reaching for a button high up on the glass ceiling of the lift. It said, up and out. Up and out, thought Charlie. What sort of room is that? Wham! The lift shot straight up like a rocket. Then suddenly, crash! Grandpa Joe shouted, help! We're done for! And Mr. Wonka said, no, we're not. We're through. We're out. The great glass lift was now hovering high over the town. How I love my chocolate factory, said Mr. Wonka, gazing down. Do you love it too, Charlie? He asked. Oh, yes, cried Charlie. I think it's the most wonderful place in the whole world. I am very pleased to hear you say that, said Mr. Wonka. You see, my dear boy, I have decided to make you a present of the whole place. Giving it to him. Gasped Grandpa Joe. But why? I've got no family at all, Mr. Wonka said. So who is going to run the factory when I get too old to do it myself? Someone's got to keep it going. So that is why you sent out the golden tickets, cried Charlie. Exactly, said Mr. Wonka. We must go and fetch the rest of the family, he cried. He pressed some buttons and the lift shot downwards toward Charlie's house. Oh, wow, giving him the whole factory, guys. Crash! Went the lift right through the roof into the old people's bedroom. Save us! cried Grandma Josephine. Mother, cried Charlie, we're all going to live in with Mr. Wonka's factory. He's giving it all to me. It took quite a time for Grandpa Joe and Charlie to explain to everyone what had been happening to them. Charlie climbed onto the bed. Please don't be frightened, he said. We're going to the most wonderful place in the world. Charlie's right, said Grandpa Joe. Will there be anything to eat when we get there? Asked Grandma Josephine. Anything to eat? Cried Charlie, laughing. Oh, you just wait and see. All right, guys. That is the end of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but I do want to say this at the end of it. One of the things that I didn't like about this book is that I was hoping that the Oompa Loompas sing. Like, if it ain't just me, let me know, guys. I'm going to leave the comments open so y'all let me know about this, because I was really hoping that Oompa Loompas, they was going to have the Oompa Loompas singing like, Oompa Loompa, doompa-dee-doo, something, you know. That's what I was hoping, but anyways. Oh, and also, at the end, they crazy. Who finna eat candy all their life? Need some food. All right, guys. I just wanted to say that. Speak my little 2 cents, guys. I hope you guys like this book, because I really did like the book and the coloring. I tried to get something that was very graphical in this, because there's not many books out there for the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And I just want to say this book was a request from one of my wonderful viewers yet again. And again, I do appreciate you guys for tuning in to Big Mama Story Time. I do appreciate your support, all of you guys' support. Please don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my channel if you guys haven't done so already. All right, guys, thank you so much. Bye.